It's time for Recipe of the Day. I love stuffed peppers, and I have a recipe for like the classic ones that is just killer. But what I don't love about them is that they're kind of time consuming, right? You have to make the beef, you're cooking ground beef, and you're cooking rice separately. Then you're mixing that together with tomato sauce. Then you're stuffing the pepper. Often I recommend that you pre-cook the peppers a little bit to make them time that they spend in the oven faster. So you're also doing that. Then finally they're in the oven. And so it's just lots of steps, lots of pans, lots of pots, just a lot. And so when I have a craving for those kinds of classic traditional stuffed peppers, but I want it to be easier, I make this stuffed pepper soup. So good. All of those flavors, way easier. It takes about 45 minutes from start to finish. That's all the chopping and everything too. But I'll tell you, most of that time it's spent simmering on the stove, unattended, and you can relax and not be stuffing anything, you know? Okay, so I am going to tell you how to make this recipe. You are starting with a large pot or Dutch oven over medium-high heat, and you're adding a pound of lean ground beef. I don't know about your grocery store. My grocery store tends to package the ground beef in like 1.3 pound packages. That's fine. Use that. Alternatively, you can use ground turkey or ground chicken. If you're going to use one of the ground poultries, I recommend that you have a look at my method for cooking ground turkey. I will link to that in the show notes for this podcast episode. It just has a lot of tips to make it like not quite as dry, especially if you're trying to use ground turkey breast, which is way drier than ground beef. You're going to want to have a look at that. Okay, so you're adding your probably ground beef to the large pot, spread it out a little bit and sprinkle it with a teaspoon of salt and 3/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper. Let that cook undisturbed until well browned underneath, 3 or 4 minutes. Then stir it and cook for about another 2 minutes. At that point, you're adding 1 medium onion that you've chopped up and 2 bell peppers that you've chopped up as well. That could be any color that you have. You're going to cook and stir those onions and peppers in with the beef just until they start to soften 2 or 3 minutes. Then you're adding 3 tablespoons of tomato paste. Like I often say, if you don't want to open a whole 6-ounce can of tomato paste, which has about 10 tablespoons inside of it, to just use some of it, it is better to get the tube of tomato paste. It is more expensive. I'm looking right now for a 5-ounce tube, 4.5 ounces. It's $3. And for the 6-ounce can, it's $1.43. That's at my Publix here in Florida. So the tube is definitely more, but you're not wasting any. So you got to take that into account. Sometimes when you're figuring out how much something costs, it's not per ounce in the container, it's per ounce that you actually use, right? So I always have a tube of the tomato paste in my fridge, and when a recipe calls for less than a can, I tend to just grab that, but up to you. Can tomato paste, tube tomato paste, all good. If you don't know about the tube of tomato paste, it's sold near your normal tomato paste in the grocery store, but usually like on a higher shelf, maybe because it's more expensive, higher things cost more. I'm not sure. That's how the wine works, right? At the wine stores sometimes. Anyways, that is where you will find the tomato paste. It's a yellow box and a yellow tube inside of the box. And I'll also tell you something that, people don't believe me about this, but in like a big pot of soup like this, sometimes ketchup will work as tomato paste. It's not going to taste like ketchup when it's diluted by all that stuff. It's just going to have that rich flavor. Also, you could just do like tomato sauce. It's just 3 tablespoons. Not going to be a huge difference. The paste is like richer and bigger, but you know what I mean. If you don't have it, you don't have to use it. There are substitutions available to you. Okay, so when you add the 3 tablespoons of tomato paste, you are also adding a big 28-ounce can of diced tomatoes and 3 cups of low sodium beef broth. You might need more later, so if you're buying that 4-cup carton, then you will probably end up using that other cup later, maybe up to you, but it's not going to go to waste. As always, you can use like bouillon cubes mixed with hot water here, or like the paste, like better than bouillon, that kind of thing to make up your 3 cups of broth. I will also say, actually, I mentioned that you can make this soup with ground turkey or ground chicken instead of the ground beef. You could also make this vegetarian. You can do 2 14-ounce cans of beans. I'd say either kidney beans or cannellini beans, which are the white kidney beans. Those would be my favorites in here. You drain those. You would add them like now when you're adding the canned ingredients. And then if you're keeping it vegetarian, you you would use vegetable broth instead of beef broth. Okay, so you're adding the 3 cups of beef broth and also 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning, 2 teaspoons of Worcestershire sauce. And I would have to tell you right here that if you are making this vegetarian, you need to get vegetarian Worcestershire sauce because regular Worcestershire sauce has anchovies in it. So if you are not a fish eating person, you would not want to have that in there. Or if you're making this for someone who's vegetarian and you've made the bean substitution and the broth substitution, you also want to make sure that you're doing the Worcestershire sauce substitution. If you don't have vegetarian Worcestershire sauce, I think you could just skip it here. I'm trying to think what might work instead. Maybe like a little bit of soy sauce would be okay. You just want that kind of like umami rich flavor. Oh, maybe adding in some chopped mushrooms when you added the bell peppers sauteed in there, they would add some of that meatiness as well. Maybe like 4 to 8 ounces of chopped up mushrooms. Okay, so you've added 2 teaspoons of Worcestershire sauce, a teaspoon of garlic powder goes in as well, and a teaspoon of paprika. I'm just using plain paprika here. You could do smoked or hot if you wanted to. And you're also adding a cup of uncooked long grain white rice. And yes, you could use brown rice if you wanted to. It's just going to take longer to cook. And while it's taking longer to cook, more liquid might evaporate from the pot, in which case you would be adding a little bit more of that broth as that happens. When you add that rice, you're also going to add another teaspoon of salt. Just know though, I called for low sodium beef broth here. If you were using full sodium, you might want to hold off on that salt until later. Also, if you're worrying about a lot of evaporation happening, like if you were using the brown rice and it's going to be evaporating more, that can concentrate the saltiness as well, in which case you might want to hold off on some of that salt at this point. Okay, so now everything is in there that's going in there, all of the ingredients for this soup. Give it a good stir, increase the heat to high, bring it up to a boil, stirring kind of often. You don't want things sticking on the bottom. Then reduce it down to low, partially cover the pot, and you're cooking it for 18 to 20 minutes until the rice is tender. Give it a little stir every now and then. And then after the rice is tender, taste, add more salt and pepper if needed. And note that the rice is going to keep sucking up liquid as it's cooking in the pot. And like if you're leaving it there for a little while you're doing something else before dinner, it's going to keep soaking up liquid. So that's when you might need to add more broth or just water and then heat it through. When you're ready to eat, you ladle this into soup bowls and top each serving with a little bit of cheese, 2 to 3 tablespoons of shredded cheddar or mozzarella, and just let the steam from the soup kind of melt the cheese that's there, and it's going to get kind of melty and gooey and really nice. I will also just tell you here that this soup does freeze well, except for the rice. Rice that's frozen in liquid kind of gets a little crumbly. It keeps soaking up liquid. It's still going to taste great. It's just not going to have the same texture. And so you can freeze the leftovers, and then afterwards, after you've thawed it and are reheating it, you'll notice you have way less liquid because the rice is soaked up so much. You're going to have to add a little bit more liquid to that as you're reheating to get it to the consistency that you want. If you're doing this as meal prep, like you're making it earlier in the week to have in the fridge, or you're making it ahead to freeze intentionally, I recommend that you keep the rice separate. Cook the rice separately according to the rice package directions. Cook the soup according to its recipe, maybe putting a little bit less liquid in the early stages because you don't have the rice there to soak it up. And then you would store those things separately. And when you're ready to eat, you can add the rice to the soup and heat that through like that. You can freeze them separately also. Okay, I will put the link to the stuffed pepper soup in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is November 13th of 2025. And if you are not subscribed to this podcast already, what are you waiting for? Search for Recipe of the Day wherever you get your podcasts, and you will get new recipes from me all the time. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookville.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.